My name is Tabitha Thorne, and on the night my brother's political career was meant to be born, I was the one who went into labor. For 30 years, I had been the quiet one, the shadow in a family that thrived in the blinding glare of the public spotlight. They were the Thornes, a name that echoed in the hallowed halls of the Capitol, a name synonymous with power, with charisma, with legacy. My father, Senator Jameson Thorne Sr., was the patriarch, a man whose voice could command a room and whose ambition was the sun our entire family orbited. My brother, Jameson Jr., or Jamie, was his heir apparent, blessed with our father's smile and our mother's social grace, but utterly lacking the substance that gives a leader his spine. And then there was me, Tabby, the afterthought, the one with the books in the quiet corners. They thought I was just the shy, awkward daughter, a supporting character in their grand drama. They had no idea I was the architect of it all, the ghost in their machine. Tonight, at the final rally, under the heat of 1,000 lights and before a sea of adoring faces, my brother was going to thank his team for the words that had made him a political star. And when he did, I was going to join him on stage to take credit for every last syllable. Before I tell you how I found myself standing in the wings of that stage, my heart a traitorous drum against my ribs, ready to either detonate my family or finally claim my own life, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Go ahead and drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever felt invisible or had your hard work claimed by someone else, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes, the quietest voices have the most to say. To understand the silence I was about to break, you have to understand the silence I was born into. The Thorne household was not a quiet place. It was loud with ambition, with strategy, with the constant humming engine of public life. But my silence was a specific, cultivated thing. It was the space created when all the air in a room is sucked up by my father's booming pronouncements and Jamie's effortless charm. I was not raised to speak. I was raised to listen, to nod, to support. My value was measured in my lack of friction. I remember a dinner when I was 10 years old. I had just won a statewide essay competition, a feat that had my teacher, Mr. Albright, bubbling with praise. He'd called my mother personally, telling her I had a gift, a way with words that was truly special. I came to the dinner table clutching the cheap blue ribbon and the certificate, my heart thrumming with a nervous pride. I waited for the lull after my father had finished recounting a tedious but, in his telling, heroic negotiation with a rival senator. "Dad," I began, my voice a small, hesitant tremor. "I won something today." I held out the certificate. He took it, glanced at it for a second, his eyes skimming the words without absorbing them. "That's nice, Tabby. Very nice." He handed it back, his attention already shifting to Jamie, who had just burst into the dining room, his cheeks flushed and his soccer uniform stained with grass. "Jamie, my boy. How was the game?" The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in the Thorne family dynamic. We were treated to a blow-by-blow account of Jamie's game, a match they had lost, but in which Jamie had apparently played with heroic vigor. My father hung on every word, interjecting with questions, with praise, with strategic advice for the next game. "That's the Thorne spirit, son. You fight to the last second, win or lose." My mother, Eleanor, beamed, her gaze fixed on her son as if he were a conquering hero. "Oh, Jamie, you must be exhausted. Let me get you a proper plate." My little blue ribbon sat by my water glass, a wilted testament to an achievement that had already been forgotten. Later that evening, as I was putting my certificate away in a desk drawer, my father came into my room. He sat on the edge of my bed, a rare occurrence. For a dizzying moment, I thought he'd come to properly acknowledge my win. "Tabby," he said, his voice softer than usual but carrying the same weight of command. "Your brother, he's going to have a life in the public eye. It's important for him to be the center of attention. It builds his confidence. A Thorne man leads from the front. A Thorne woman supports him. You understand, don't you? Your role is just as important. It's to be his rock." He patted my head, the gesture meant to be affectionate but feeling like a seal being pressed into hot wax, branding me with my purpose. I was not to be the star. I was to be the stagehand, forever in the wings. This pattern repeated itself endlessly through my childhood and adolescence. My straight A's were too nice, while Jamie's C+ average was a sign of a social mind, not a bookish one. My acceptance into a prestigious university for literature was met with a distracted, "Wonderful, dear. Just make sure it's a safe campus. While Jamie's scraping into the state college on a legacy admission was celebrated with a lavish party. My world was internal, built of books and language and the intricate architecture of ideas. Their world was external, built of handshakes and sound bites and the carefully curated image of a perfect, powerful family. The only person who seemed to see me was my Aunt Carol, my father's estranged older sister. She was a retired journalist, a woman who had built her own career on the power of words and had little patience for the political theater my father so loved. She'd call me after every holiday, her voice a welcome dose of sanity. So, she'd say, her tone dry. Let me guess. Jamie learned to tie a new knot in his tie and your father is nominating him for a Nobel Prize, while you quietly solved cold fusion in the den and no one noticed. I would laugh, a genuine, unburdened sound that rarely escaped me in my own home. It wasn't cold fusion, I'd reply. Just a thesis on post-war existentialism. He'd cackle. Even better. That's far more useful. Don't ever let them convince you that their noise is more valuable than your substance, Tabitha. Don't you ever. Her words were a lifeline, but they weren't enough to change the tide. I craved my father's approval with the desperation of a starving person. I believed that if I could just achieve something undeniable, something so brilliant he couldn't possibly ignore it, he would finally see me. He would finally look at me with the same pride he reserved for his son. It was a foolish, childish hope, but it was the engine that drove me. I graduated summa cum laude. I got a master's degree. I published a few scholarly articles in obscure literary journals. Each achievement was met with the same lukewarm, dismissive praise. That's lovely, dear. It was like offering a banquet to a man who only ate one thing. And I was not the thing he wanted. The beginning of the end, or perhaps the real beginning of my story, came on a crisp autumn evening. The family was gathered in the formal living room, a space reserved for important announcements. The air was thick with anticipation. My father stood before the marble fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking every bit the statesman he was. As you all know, he began, his voice resonating with practiced gravitas, I've served this state for 30 years. It has been the honor of my life. But it's time for a new generation. It's time for a new Thorn to carry the torch. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. He turned his gaze to my brother. And that's why, in the upcoming special election, I will be stepping down and I am putting my full support and the entire Thorn political machine behind my son Jameson Thorn Jr., to take my seat in the United States Senate. My mother burst into tears of pride, rushing to hug Jamie, who looked simultaneously thrilled and terrified. It was the coronation we had all been expecting my entire life. I felt a familiar, dull ache in my chest, the ache of inevitability. I clapped along with everyone else, the sound of my own hands a hollow echo. A few days later, Jamie held his first press conference to announce his candidacy. It was a catastrophe. He strode to the podium, radiating confidence, but the moment he opened his mouth, it was clear the suit was empty. He was armed with a handful of platitudes he'd clearly heard our father repeat 1,000 times, but they were disconnected, meaningless. I believe, in the future, he started, his smile unwavering. A future of prosperity. For the people. And I will work hard, for that future. With strength. And a strong, economy. When the reporters started asking questions, it got worse. A simple query about his stance on a recent trade agreement sent him into a tailspin of word salad. He stammered, his eyes darting towards my father, who was standing at the side of the room, his expression slowly hardening from pride to horror. The charismatic smile faltered, replaced by a sheen of panicked sweat. He looked like a little boy lost in his father's oversized suit. That night the mood at home was funereal. The glowing news reports my family was accustomed to were replaced with clips of Jamie's bumbling performance, pundits openly questioning if the Thorn magic had finally run out. My father paced the study like a caged lion, his face a mask of thunderous fury. He wasn't ready, my mother whispered, wringing her hands. We pushed him too soon. He has the name. He has the face. Is it too much to ask for him to have a single coherent thought in his head? My father roared, slamming his fist on his mahogany desk. I was in the library pretending to read but listening to every word. The legacy was crumbling before it had even been passed on. And that's when my father's eyes fell on me. He stopped pacing and stared at me, a long, calculating look I had never seen from him before. It wasn't a look of fatherly affection. It was the look of a man who had just spotted a tool he hadn't realized he possessed. He walked into the library and closed the heavy oak doors behind him, shutting us in together. "Tabitha," he said, his voice now low and controlled. "You were always good with words. English, all that. You write things." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, as if he were cataloging an asset. I simply nodded, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Your brother is in trouble," he continued, getting straight to the point. "He has the heart of a leader, but he gets tangled in the details." A generous way to describe the vacuous mess I'd witnessed earlier. "He needs some talking points, some structure. I want you to help him." I stared at him, my mind racing. Help him? After a lifetime of being told to stay out of the way? What kind of help? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You'll write for him," he said, the words blunt and stripped of any pretense. "He'll tell you his ideas, his vision, and you'll polish it. Make it sound like him, but better. Sharper. No one needs to know. It will be our little secret. Your contribution to the family. Your duty." His ideas. His vision. I knew Jamie had neither. He had a desire to be liked and a desperate need for our father's approval. That was the extent of his political philosophy. But as I looked at my father, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't pride in me, not yet. It was desperation. And in his desperation I saw my opening. A small, treacherous seed of hope began to sprout in the barren ground of my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the thing I could do that was so valuable, so essential, that he would finally have to see me. He wouldn't be able to dismiss this. I would become indispensable. "Okay," I said, the word tasting strange and powerful on my tongue. "I'll do it." He nodded, a curt, satisfied gesture. "Good girl," he said before turning and leaving the room, the crisis already averted in his mind. He didn't thank me. He didn't discuss compensation or credit. He just gave an order and expected it to be followed. But I didn't care. Because I had a plan. I wasn't going to polish Jamie's ideas. I was going to give him mine. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my laptop, the screen a stark white rectangle in the darkness of my room. The task felt monumental. I had to build a candidate from scratch. I had to create a voice, a philosophy, a soul, and insert it into the handsome, empty vessel that was my brother. I started by researching. I devoured policy papers on economics, healthcare, foreign relations. I read the voting records of my father's rivals. I studied the demographics of the district, the anxieties of the electorate, the hopes that simmered beneath the surface of their daily lives. I wasn't just writing talking points. I was building an entire political identity. The first speech was for a Chamber of Commerce luncheon. Jamie's only instruction, delivered via a mumbled phone call, was, "They're business guys. Talk about, business." It was like asking a master chef to create a feast with only a salt shaker for ingredients. So I ignored him. I thought about the stories Aunt Carol used to tell me about the real people behind the headlines. I thought about the struggles I'd read about in the local papers. The small factory that had closed, the family farm struggling to compete. I decided not to write a speech for a politician. I decided to write a speech for a person. I wove a narrative about community, about the interconnectedness of Main Street and the corporate boardroom. I used simple, powerful language, full of metaphors that were both accessible and profound. I wrote about the dignity of work, the quiet courage of entrepreneurs, and the idea that an economy isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet, but the sum of a million individual dreams. I crafted a voice for Jamie that was warm, empathetic, and wise beyond his years. A voice that sounded nothing like him, but everything like the man I knew the voters wanted him to be. To maintain secrecy, we established a protocol. I created a new encrypted email address, something sterile and untraceable. He had one too. No names, no subject lines. Just the text of the speech sent into the digital ether. I typed the final words, my fingers aching, my eyes burning from the screen. I read it over one last time, a thrill of fear and pride running through me. This was my work. My mind, my heart, distilled into 2,000 words. I hit send. The next day I watched the luncheon on a live stream, my stomach in knots. Jamie walked to the podium looking polished and confident. He placed his notes, my notes on the lectern and began to speak. And as my words filled the room, a strange magic happened. They fit him. The cadence I had imagined, the pauses for emphasis, the confident tone, he delivered it all flawlessly. He was a natural performer, a perfect vessel. The audience was captivated. The usually staid businessmen were leaning forward, nodding, some even looking moved. When he finished, the applause was not polite. It was thunderous. I sat there in my quiet room watching my brother soak in the adoration for ideas he'd never had and words he could never write. My father, who was in attendance, was the first on his feet, his face beaming with a relief so profound it was almost comical. He clapped Jamie on the back, a gesture of pure, unadulterated pride. The pride I had starved for my entire life. That evening the family celebrated. The house was buzzing again, the specter of failure banished. My father poured champagne. "You did it, son," he boomed. "You found your voice. I knew you had it in you." Jamie, high on the praise, just grinned. "Thanks, Dad. I just spoke from the heart." From the heart. I felt a cold, sharp sting. No one looked at me. No one mentioned my name. My father didn't seek me out for a quiet nod of thanks. Jamie didn't send a text. It was as if I didn't exist. I had been the architect of his triumph, and I was utterly, completely invisible. The small seed of hope that had sprouted in my chest withered and died, and in its place something harder, something colder began to grow. The campaign became my life. I was a ghost, a nocturnal creature haunting the silent house long after my family had gone to sleep. My room transformed into a campaign headquarters, the walls covered in whiteboards, my desk buried under stacks of research papers, polling data, and legal pads filled with my frantic scrawl. I became a machine churning out content at an astonishing rate. I wrote the soaring speeches for the rallies, the sharp, witty comebacks for the debates, the thoughtful, nuanced op-eds for the major newspapers, and even the folksy, relatable anecdotes he'd drop at town halls. I wrote the charming social media posts that made him seem accessible and the powerful fundraising emails that brought in millions. I was the brain, the soul, and the voice of the entire operation. My routine was grueling and solitary. Jamie would send a vague, one-line email. "Need something on healthcare for the nurses' union tomorrow." Or "big dinner with veterans." Something patriotic. And I would dive in. I'd spend hours researching veterans' affairs, reading personal accounts of returning soldiers, finding the emotional core of the issue. I would then distill that complex reality into a 2-page speech that was both emotionally resonant and policy sound. I would send it to the anonymous email address, and the next day I would watch on the news as Jamie delivered my words to a weeping mother or a cheering crowd. He became a political phenomenon. The media, once so skeptical, couldn't get enough of him. Headlines praised his surprising depth, his uncommon eloquence, his old soul wisdom. Pundits who had dismissed him as a lightweight now called him the future of the party. He was on the cover of magazines, a portrait of thoughtful leadership. A portrait I had painted, brushstroke by painstaking brushstroke. The disconnect between my reality and his was a chasm that grew wider every day. My reality was cold coffee and the 3 a.m. glow of a laptop screen, the quiet desperation of a looming deadline, the intellectual heavy lifting of crafting a coherent political ideology from thin air. His reality was the roar of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the fawning praise of people who believed he was a prodigy. He started to believe it himself. His initial terror was replaced by a swaggering confidence. He began to internalize the persona I had created for him. In interviews he would quote lines I had written as if they were his own spontaneous thoughts. He started to talk about his process, how he liked to get away by himself and just think, to let the ideas marinate. The arrogance was breathtaking. He was not just taking credit for the work, he was taking credit for the labor, for the very act of thinking that he was utterly incapable of. My only human connection in this clandestine operation was Marcus, the campaign manager. He was a sharp, no-nonsense political veteran my father had hired when it became clear Jamie couldn't manage his own schedule, let alone a statewide campaign. Marcus was clever and he was observant. He never said anything to me directly, but I would sometimes catch him looking at me during family strategy sessions, a flicker of curiosity in his shrewd eyes. He saw me, the quiet daughter who never spoke but was always present, always listening. He knew something was off. The inevitable near disaster happened during a televised town hall. The format was unscripted, a moderator taking questions from the audience. Jamie was brilliant for the first 45 minutes, armed with the prep documents I had spent a week creating. I had anticipated dozens of potential questions and written out concise, powerful answers for each. He was a master of regurgitation. But then a young college student asked a follow-up question. It wasn't hostile, just intelligent. She picked up on a detail in his answer about environmental policy, an answer I had written, and asked him to elaborate on the specific cap-and-trade mechanism he'd just endorsed. I watched on the monitor backstage, my blood turning to ice. I hadn't prepped him for that. It was a second-level question, one that required actual understanding, not just memorization. Jamie froze. The confident smile evaporated. He blinked, the gears in his head grinding to a halt because there were no gears to begin with. Well, he began, his voice suddenly an octave higher. The mechanism is a very good mechanism. It's complex. But it's about, the caps. And the trades. For the environment. The room was silent. The moderator's face was a perfect mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes betrayed her. He knew. Everyone knew. He was a fraud. Before the silence could become a fatal wound, Marcus, ever the professional, stepped in. He spoke to the moderator from the side. We're running short on time. Can we get to the final question, please? The moment was saved, but the damage was done. Back in the green room, the atmosphere was toxic. My father was silent, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Jamie was pacing, blaming the student. It was a trick question. A gotcha question. Marcus waited for my father and mother to leave before he rounded on Jamie. I was packing up my laptop in the corner, pretending to be invisible, but I heard every word. Don't you ever lie to me again, Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You didn't write that answer, just like you haven't written a single word of this campaign. I don't know who your ghost is, but they're brilliant. They're carrying you. But they can't be in your head when a follow-up question comes. So who is it, Jamie? Who is writing your material? Jamie, cornered and panicking, did what he always did. He lied. I have a team, he sputtered. A team of consultants. They brief me. It's a collaborative process. A team of consultants. He had erased me and replaced me with a fictional committee. I closed my laptop, the quiet click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the tense room. Jamie wouldn't meet my eyes. He knew I'd heard. The sting of being ignored by my family was a familiar ache, but this was different. This was a deliberate, cowardly act of erasure. He was actively hiding my existence to protect his own fragile ego. The cold thing that had taken root in my chest began to sharpen, honing itself into a fine, sharp point. The true catalyst, the moment the point of that blade finally pierced my consciousness, came a few weeks before the election. The New York Times was doing a major profile on our family, a glossy, fawning piece about the Thorne political dynasty. The journalist, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, spent a day at our family home, observing the well-oiled machine. I was, as usual, present but not participating, a piece of furniture in the backdrop of their lives. We were all sitting in the sunroom, putting on a show of relaxed family harmony. Sarah was wrapping up her interview with my father. It's a remarkable legacy, Senator, she said. And with Jamie poised to carry it on, it's a powerful story. But I'm curious about your daughter. Tabitha. She turned her warm, intelligent gaze on me. I was so startled to be addressed directly that I flinched. Does she have any political ambitions? Do you see a future for her in this world? The room went quiet. All eyes were on my father. This was his chance. This was the moment he could finally, publicly acknowledge my contribution. He could be clever about it, hint at my role as a key advisor, praise my sharp mind. A million possibilities for him to finally give me a sliver of the credit I deserved flashed through my mind. Dad, he laughed. It was a dismissive, patronizing sound that echoed in the sun-drenched room. Oh, Tabby, he said, reaching over to pat my hand as if I were a child or a pet. Bless her heart, she's the quiet one. Not a political bone in her body. Her head is always stuck in a book. She's happy to be behind the scenes, supporting her brother. Aren't you, dear? He smiled at me, a warm, fatherly smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a command, not a question. Smile. Not. Play your part. In that instant, something inside me broke. It was a clean, silent snap. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed anger, of desperate, unrequited hope, all coalesced into a single moment of terrible clarity. He didn't just not see me. He refused to see me. My invisibility was a necessary component of his world. For Jamie to shine, I had to be in the dark. It wasn't an oversight, it was a strategy. And I was done with it. I smiled back at him, a placid, empty smile. "Of course, Dad," I said softly. And in the silent, secret chambers of my heart, I declared war. That evening, I locked my bedroom door and called the one person in the world I knew would understand. Aunt Carol picked up on the second ring. "Tabitha, you sound different." I didn't bother with pleasantries. The words just poured out of me, a torrent of confession that I had held back for months. I told her everything. The late-night writing sessions, the secret emails, the speeches, the op-eds, Jamie's fumbling my father's command. I told her about the team of consultants, and the soul-crushing interview with the journalist. When I finished, I was breathless, my throat raw. For a long moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then she spoke, her voice devoid of shock. "I knew it," she said, her tone a mixture of anger and a strange, sad pride. "I knew those words weren't Jamie's. They had texture. They had a conscience. They had your fingerprints all over them. They sounded like the girl who wrote that beautiful, angry essay about justice in the 8th grade. The one your father told you was too aggressive." I hadn't thought about that essay in years. I'd won an award for it, and my father had been vaguely embarrassed by its passionate, idealistic tone. Thorns are pragmatic, Tabby, not crusaders. Hearing her remember it, connecting the me I was then to the me I was now, was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was there. "What do I do, Carol?" I whispered, the question feeling impossibly heavy. "They're going to win. He's going to go to Washington on my back and I'll just disappear." She was quiet for another moment. "I can't tell you what to do, honey. That's the whole point. For your entire life, people have been telling you what to do, who to be. But I will tell you this. You have created something of immense value. You built a king. The question you have to answer is, who owns what you built? Is it the person whose name is on the outside or the person who laid every single brick? Whatever you decide to do, Tabitha, make sure it's for you. Not to please them, not to hurt them. For you." We talked for another hour, but that was the part that stuck. Who owns what you built? The question echoed in my mind after I hung up. I looked around my room at the evidence of my secret labor. The books with dozens of bookmarks, the articles I had printed and highlighted, the rough drafts of speeches covered in my own handwriting. This was my work. My intellectual property. My voice. And they had stolen it. A plan began to form, not a hot-headed, angry plan, but a cold, precise, and meticulous one. I was a writer, a strategist. I had built a campaign out of nothing. I could certainly orchestrate a single evening. The final rally was in 2 weeks. It was to be Jamie's crowning moment. A victory lap in front of thousands of supporters at the city arena. It was the perfect stage. And I knew with a certainty that was as terrifying as it was liberating, that I would be on it. I opened my laptop and began to write one last speech. But this one wouldn't be for Jamie. This one was for me. The night of the final rally was a sensory assault. The air backstage at the arena thrummed with a nervous, electric energy that vibrated up through the soles of my shoes. A chaotic ballet of stagehands with headsets, stressed-out media wranglers and self-important local politicians played out around me. On the monitors, I could see the vast sea of people filling the arena, a churning ocean of handmade signs and ecstatic faces. They were chanting Jamie's name. Jamia, Jamia, Jamia. The sound was a physical force, a wave of adoration for a man who was nothing more than a mirage I had painstakingly crafted. I clutched the folded piece of paper in my jacket pocket. It was a copy of the victory speech I had written for him 2 days ago, a soaring piece of rhetoric about unity and a bold new future. My masterpiece of deception. The printer I had used was loaded with a specific pale cream-colored paper I'd bought myself, and my final review notes were scribbled in the margins in my distinctive green ink. A small detail, but I was a creature of details. I saw my family arrive and be escorted to their VIP seats in the front row. My father, looking regal and immensely proud, waved to the crowd like a visiting king. My mother, elegant in a deep blue suit, smiled her serene, practiced smile. Jamie looked like a star. He was radiating a confidence that was so complete, so unshakable, that it was almost believable. He had inhabited the role so fully that the line between the performance and the man had dissolved. He saw me standing in the wings and gave me a quick, dismissive nod, the kind one gives to a junior staffer. There was no recognition in his eyes of the secret we shared, no flicker of gratitude or guilt. I was just part of the scenery. The anger, which had been a low simmer for weeks, began to boil. Marcus, the campaign manager, came over to me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You all right, Tabitha? You look a little pale." He was the only one who ever seemed to notice my state of being. "Just nerves," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's a big night for the family." He gave me a long, searching look. "Yeah," he said slowly. "It is." He knew. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew Jamie was a puppet. He just didn't know I was the one pulling the strings. The lights dimmed. A slickly produced video montage filled the massive screens, showcasing Jamie's journey. Laughing with factory workers, listening intently to seniors hugging babies. My words, my scripts were the narration. Then the introduction came, a booming voice listing his fictional accomplishments, and Jamie bounded onto the stage to a deafening roar. The applause went on for minutes. He stood there, basking in it, his arms outstretched, a messiah accepting the worship of his flock. He motioned for them to quiet down, and then he began to speak. He launched into the speech, my speech, and his delivery was flawless. He spoke of the sacred trust between a representative and their constituents. He talked about the quiet dignity of the working class, a dignity I had tried to honor in my writing. He spoke of giving a voice to the voiceless. The irony was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. With every word he spoke, every turn of phrase I had labored over in the dead of night, my resolve hardened from steel into diamond. This was not his victory. It was mine. And the world was about to know it. He reached the soaring crescendo of the speech, the part designed to bring the crowd to its feet. "So when you go to the polls on Tuesday," he cried, his voice ringing with the passion I had written for him, "you are not just voting for a man. You are voting for an idea. The idea that together, we can build a future worthy of our children." The arena erupted. Confetti cannons fired, filling the air with a blizzard of red, white, and blue paper. He let the applause wash over him for a long moment, his face a perfect picture of humble gratitude. Then he raised his hand for silence. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Thank you all. I am so humbled. But I couldn't have done this alone." My heart slammed against my ribs. This was it. I need to thank the people who made this all possible. My incredible father, Senator Thorne, whose guidance has been my North Star. The camera zoomed in on my father, who nodded magnanimously. My wonderful mother, whose love and support has been my bedrock. The camera found my mother, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. And our tireless campaign manager, Marcus, and his whole team, who worked miracles every single day. He was about to wrap up. He was smiling, ready to give a final wave. It was now or never. I took a deep breath, the stale, recycled air of the arena filling my lungs. I felt a strange, preternatural calm settle over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I stepped out from the shadows of the wings and began to walk towards the center of the stage. A young stagehand in a black t-shirt saw me and moved to intercept, his face a mask of panicked confusion. "Ma'am, you can't," he started to say, putting a hand on my arm. I didn't even look at him. I just kept walking, my pace steady and deliberate. My forward motion was so certain, so absolute, that he simply dropped his hand and fell away bewildered. A ripple of confusion went through the front row. I saw my father's face change from pride to utter disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jamie, who had been waving to the crowd, slowly lowered his arm. His smile faltered, then vanished completely as he saw me approaching. The roar of the crowd began to die down, replaced by a confused murmur. The cameras, which had been focused on Jamie, swiveled towards me, the red recording lights like a dozen angry eyes. I didn't stop until I was standing right beside him at the very podium that bore the family seal. The podium where he had just delivered my life's work. There was a spare microphone on a stand next to the main one, intended for a guest who was never scheduled to appear. I reached out and took it, my hand steady. The low hum of the live mic filled the sudden, vast silence of the arena. I looked at my brother. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. For the first time in his life he had no script. I then turned my gaze to the thousands of people staring up at me, their faces a sea of confusion. I took another breath. My brother is right, I said, my voice clear and amplified, ringing through the enormous space with an authority no one in my family knew I possessed. He couldn't have done this without his team. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I turned my head slightly to look at Jamie again. And since he seems to have forgotten a key member, I thought I'd come up and introduce myself. The murmur in the crowd stopped. There was only a dead, ringing silence, the kind that precedes a lightning strike. I faced the cameras, the bright lights feeling not like a threat, but like a long-overdue spotlight. My name is Tabitha Thorne, I said. And I am his speechwriter. I saw my father jolt in his seat as if he'd been hit by a taser. I wrote the words you just heard. I wrote the words you cheered for. I wrote every single speech, every op-ed, every debate prep document that made you believe in him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded cream-colored pages of the speech. I held it up for the cameras to see, my handwritten green notes clearly visible in the harsh light. I wrote every last word that built his career. I placed the speech gently on the podium, a final, damning piece of evidence. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The silence held for a beat, a collective held breath of 10,000 people, and then it shattered. Not into applause but into a cacophony of chaos. A roar went up from the media pit, a frenzy of shouted questions and the machine gun chatter of camera shutters. On stage, Jamie was frozen, a statue of a man, his face a ghastly shade of white. His mouth was slightly open but no words came out. The persona I had built for him had crumbled to dust, leaving only the hollow, terrified man I knew him to be. In the front row, my father was on his feet, his face a terrifying shade of purple, his mouth forming my name in a silent, furious snarl. My mother looked as though she had seen a ghost, her hand pressed to her chest as if to keep her heart from bursting. Marcus, the consummate professional, was the first to react. I saw him barking into his headset, his face grim. Cut the feed. Cut the feed now. Get security up there. But it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The story was already loose, a wild animal uncaged and sprinting into the world. I didn't wait for security. My part was done. I turned my back on my brother, on the podium, on the life I was systematically dismantling. I walked calmly towards the side of the stage, my footsteps echoing in my own ears. I didn't look at my family. I couldn't. If I saw the full force of their betrayal and rage, I was afraid my newfound spine would dissolve. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, walking through the pandemonium I had unleashed. As I reached the backstage area, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Aunt Carol. She had a small, wry smile on her face and car keys dangling from her finger. "I had a feeling you might need a getaway driver," she said, her voice a calm island in the hurricane of noise. "The back exit is this way. Less dramatic." I felt a wave of gratitude so immense it almost brought me to my knees. I hadn't asked her to be there. I hadn't even told her my specific plan. But she knew. She had always known. She slung an arm around my shoulder and guided me through a maze of corridors and loading docks, away from the shouting and the flashing lights. We emerged into the cool night air of a deserted parking garage. My phone, which I had silenced but not turned off, began to vibrate violently in my pocket, a frantic buzzing seizure. I pulled it out. The screen was a cascade of missed calls and frantic texts. Father. Mother. Gimme. Father again. The messages were a blur of fury and disbelief. What have you done? Call me immediately. You have ruined this family. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then held down the power button until the screen went black. The ensuing silence was the sweetest I had ever known. We got into her old, unassuming sedan and pulled out of the garage, leaving the arena and my old life behind us. We didn't speak for a long time. I just watched the city lights slide by the window, feeling a strange and volatile cocktail of emotions. Terror, exhilaration, grief, and a profound, bone-deep relief. It was the feeling of a limb being amputated, a painful severance that you know is necessary to save your life. We went back to her small, cozy apartment, a place filled with books and art and the comforting smell of old paper. She made me a cup of tea, her movements calm and deliberate. Then she turned on the television. My face was on every channel. The story had exploded. Hashtag Thorn Speechgate and hashtag Ghostwriter Tabitha were the top 2 trending topics worldwide. News helicopters were circling the arena. Political commentators were in a state of high excitement, dissecting the footage of my walkout again and again. Some were painting me as a vindictive, jealous sister, a scorned woman trying to tear down her successful brother. But just as many, if not more, were holding me up as something else entirely. They had found the journalist Sarah Jenkins, and she was on the leading cable news network, looking both vindicated and thrilled. I knew something was off, she was saying, her voice filled with conviction. When I interviewed the family, Tabitha was treated like a non-entity. Senator Thorne dismissed her as the quiet one, someone with her head in the clouds. But now it's clear she wasn't in the clouds, she was in the engine room running the entire show. This isn't just a story about a family squabble. This is a story about a woman whose labor and intellect were systemically erased by the powerful men in her own family. She didn't just expose her brother, she exposed a dynasty built on a lie. Hearing my reality validated, spoken aloud by a respected journalist on national television, was a powerful balm on a lifetime of wounds. I had spoken my truth and at least some part of the world was listening. I didn't know what would happen next, but as I sat there wrapped in a blanket in my aunt's quiet living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt free. The days that followed were a blur. The media storm was relentless. My face, my name, my story were everywhere. As predicted, my family's political machine tried to paint me as unstable, as a bitter, failed writer lashing out in a fit of jealousy. But their narrative couldn't hold. I had been too thorough. Aunt Carol, using her old journalistic connections, leaked a few select anonymized documents to Sarah Jenkins. Early drafts of speeches in my handwriting, research notes that corresponded perfectly with the dates and topics of Jamie's key policy announcements. The evidence was irrefutable. The story shifted definitively in my favor. The public loves a story of a quiet underdog, and they were fascinated by the woman who had single-handedly created a political star and then just as single-handedly destroyed him. 2 days after the rally, Jamie officially withdrew from the race, citing personal family matters and the need to heal from this devastating betrayal. The Thorne dynasty, once an untouchable institution, was now a national punchline, a cautionary tale about hubris and deceit. My father's legacy was forever tarnished, not by a political rival, but by the daughter he had deemed irrelevant. As the family's star fell, mine began to rise in the most unexpected way. The world, it turned out, was very interested in the quiet one. I was inundated with offers. Publishing houses wanted my memoir. Political consulting firms, impressed by the campaign I had built, wanted to hire me as a senior strategist. Major news networks offered me contributor contracts as a political analyst. For the first time in my life, I was being seen not for my name but for my mind. I was a commodity, valued for the very skills my family had taken for granted and hidden away. I took my time holing up in Aunt Carol's apartment, letting the noise die down. I turned my phone back on but changed my number, giving the new one only to Carol. I needed space to think, to process the tectonic shift in my own life. Guided by my aunt's steady advice, I hired a sharp literary agent and a shrewd lawyer. I decided that the first thing I would do was write a book. Not just a tell-all about the campaign, but a real memoir about finding my voice, about the subtle, insidious ways women's contributions are often absorbed and erased by the structures around them. It would be my story in my own words with my name on the cover. It was the ultimate act of claiming my own narrative. About 3 months after the rally, after the book deal was announced and had made headlines of its own, I received an email forwarded through my lawyer. It was from my father. He wasn't demanding or yelling. He was asking. He wanted to meet. Just the two of us. Against my lawyer's advice, but with Carol's quiet encouragement, I agreed. I chose the venue, a neutral, quiet corner of the city's botanical garden. I arrived first, choosing a bench by a placid koi pond. When he arrived, I was shocked by his appearance. He looked smaller. The imposing, larger-than-life figure of my childhood had been diminished. He had lost weight and there were new, deep lines etched around his eyes. He looked tired. He looked old. He sat down on the bench, leaving a careful space between us. He stared at the fish for a long time before he spoke. "Why, Tabitha?" he asked, his voice rough, stripped of its usual booming resonance. "Why did you do it?" You could have come to me. We could have worked something out. Why did you have to destroy your brother? Why destroy the family name in front of the entire world? The old me would have shrunk under his indictment. The old me would have felt a surge of guilt, of responsibility for his pain. But the old me was gone. I looked at him not with anger but with a strange, sad clarity. I didn't destroy Jamie, I said, my voice calm and even. Jamie was never really there. I destroyed the illusion we all created for him. And I didn't do it to hurt him. I did it to save myself. I told him everything then, not the angry confession I'd given Carol, but a quiet, factual recounting of my experience. I told him about the years of being invisible, of my achievements being dismissed. I told him how I'd hoped the campaign would be my chance to finally earn his respect. You never saw me, Dad, I said, the words coming without a tremor. You saw a solution to a problem. You saw a tool to prop up the son you'd chosen and to protect the legacy you'd built. You didn't ask for my help. You demanded my silence and my labor. I didn't destroy the family name. I just finally signed my name to my own work. He listened for the first time in my life, truly listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. When I was finished, he just stared into the water, his jaw working silently. I didn't expect a grand, tearful apology. It wasn't in his nature. But I saw something shift in his eyes. A crack in the foundation of his certainty. I thought, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I thought I was protecting the family. Protecting you. It was a weak justification, a man grasping at straws, but it was also, I realized, the closest he would ever get to admitting he was wrong. It wasn't absolution and it wasn't a real apology, but it was a beginning. The power dynamic between us had been permanently, irrevocably recalibrated. He was no longer the sun and I was no longer a forgotten planet in his orbit. We were just two people sitting on a bench trying to figure out what was left. It's been 2 years since that day at the rally. My book, The Ghostwriter, was a bestseller. I've become a political commentator, a voice people seek out for my analysis and insight. My own insight. I am no longer Tabby the quiet one. I am Tabitha Thorne and my voice is my own. My relationship with my parents is complicated. It's distant but it's honest. We are slowly, awkwardly trying to build something new from the rubble. There are no more assumptions, no more assigned roles. My father in his own way is trying. He reads my articles. He sometimes calls me after I'm on television to tell me I made a salient point. From him that's a love sonnet. I haven't spoken to Jamie. I don't know if I ever will. Some things once broken can't be pieced back together. His shame and my freedom are two sides of the same coin, and I don't think we can ever reconcile that. But I have found my own family, my chosen family. My fierce, loyal Aunt Carol, the friends and colleagues who see me and value me for who I am, not for who my family wanted me to be. My whole life I was told my voice didn't matter, that my role was to be silent, to be supportive, to be the invisible scaffolding that held up the men in my life. Turns out my voice was the most powerful weapon our family possessed. And the moment I chose to use it for myself was the moment my real life began. It was a terrifying choice, but it's a choice I would make again 1,000 times over. Because your value isn't determined by the people who refuse to see it. It's something you define for yourself. And that's my story. It's a story about family, about power, and about the quiet courage it takes to claim your own voice. Have you ever been underestimated or had your contributions ignored? I'd be honored if you would share your own story in the comments below. Reading about your experiences is one of the most powerful parts of sharing my own. And please, don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your strength in the most unexpected places. You can also share this video with anyone you think might need to hear it. Remember that family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood. And sometimes the most important words you'll ever write are your own. Thank you so much for joining me today and thank you for listening. I wish you all the strength to speak your own truth.